welcome to yet another episode of The Citizen Takes the Mic, and a big thank you to everyone who has joined us today. Today, we're going to be discussing a very important topic and something that I feel certainly needs to be discussed a lot more, and that is adoption, especially in the context of India. And I'd like to welcome our guest for today, Dr. Vinita Bhargava. She's a retired professor, Department of Human Development and Childhood Studies from Delhi University. She's also one of the founding members of CARA, which is the Central Agency for Adoption in India. She's also the author of the book Adoption in India and is an adoptive parent herself. So, Dr. Vinita, we are extremely grateful to have you join us. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Blessy, for calling me in to talk on the most favorite topic of mine. And I'm always ready to talk about the adoption. Even if it's a bus ride or a train ride or an aeroplane ride, I feel people need to know much more than they know regarding adoption. And therefore, I'm extremely happy to be on this program today. More so because 14th is not only Children's Day, but it's also deemed as Adoption Day. And many of us have been celebrating it as Adoption Day. And therefore, it's a great privilege to be here today and talk about this area. Thank you
That's
so much.
wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. So, before we begin, I just want to wish a very happy Children's Day to all the children of parents that have joined us today and to all the children across the country. And I truly believe that if we want to change the world, we need to work on our children because they are the future. And every single child deserves a loving home and a supportive environment that helps them thrive and develop and become the best version of themselves. But sadly, today there are so many reports that indicate that millions of children in our country don't have that privilege. And we'll talk about all that in a bit. But first, Dr. Vinita, I would really like to hear about your experience of adoption and why would you encourage people to adopt?
So it's a really long journey now. It began almost 35 years ago when I was a young person wanting to change the world. I was working in a village in Rajasthan. I think many would know Tilonia, Bankar and Aruna Roy's organization. And at that time, I really felt that the world has so many children, and one doesn't really need to produce one's own to actually be a parent to a child. And that stayed with me for a long time. And when I met the right person, and both of us decided that that was something I would do or we would do together. So now we have two children. I mean, they're not children anymore, they're young adults. I have a 38-year-old biological son, and I have a 35-year-old adopted daughter. And it's been an amazing journey. It's been roller coaster as well. And I must tell you that with this began a whole series of hats that I donned. Because when we adopted our little girl, there wasn't really very much that was available in terms of research in India as to what one should do as a parent of an adoptive child. Should we tell the child? Should we talk about it? Should we tell other people? What are going to be the repercussions of talking about this? What is the child going to feel? Is she going to hate us? Is she going to love us? So many questions were there. And therefore began my journey as a researcher. I registered for my PhD in the area of adoption. And while I was doing this, I think India signed the Hague Convention. And that is a convention or a treaty that we signed to regulate inter-country adoption. Because there were a lot of malpractices, there was a lot of trafficking that was happening. There was a very, very important landmark judgment by Justice Bhagwati, which changed the complexion of adoption, which earlier used to be totally unregulated. So there were a lot of stories about the fact that there was trafficking in children. Children were used as camel racers or for you know, by pedophiles, by all kinds of people for various exploitative purposes. And therefore, this judgment and then subsequent signing of the Hague Convention was a very significant fact. I became one of the founder members of CARA and then understood the larger, the macro picture of adoption. Because till then I was an adoptive parent and I would always think that, how come it's only the rich who adopt and how come there were, only boys were preferred and yet there were so many girls and where did these children come from? What was happening to them? So there were lots of questions. And I would often sit just on the pavement outside organizations and watch parents come in and out. The journey as a researcher was very tough because there's tremendous secrecy around the issue of adoption. There are not many people or parents, and there weren't that many who were willing to talk about it. So I think my entry into CARA and also the VC at that time, which was Sivara, uh, became an entry point into the research world and subsequently into policy making and other important decisions. Also, while I was traversing this journey, I realized that parents were very alone in the task of parenting. There wasn't really anybody they could go to. Uh, Family, if they had issues, family would say, we told you, this is not a good idea. We don't know the background of children. We don't know where they come from. So, therefore, they didn't have any place to go to. And that really resulted in setting up of APNA, that is Alternative Parenting Network Association, an association. It's a loose network of families that have over time adopted kids. Some have children as old as 40. They can't be called kids, they're young adults who have children of their own. And then there are people who are pre adoptive parents who have joined in, want to know about the issue. So currently, I am, focused on really working towards preparing parents for the task of parenting an adoptive child. Because I do believe, like most people do believe, it's just parenting. However, when we talk about parenting an adopted child, there is a difference because the issues of adoption get entangled with the issues of parenting, and therefore, at every stage of development, there is something that comes in which makes it a little different and needs to be addressed. Whether it's a 3-year-old or a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old or a 15-year-old, and right up to adulthood, that developmental trajectory is something that very few people have actually studied or understood. So I have been right now pushing governments. Earlier we had almost made it mandatory that every parent who adopts a child should have some pre-adoptive counseling so that they are far more informed about it and they can deal with issues as they come with more confidence. But unfortunately, that hasn't happened over the country. And it's a very sad thing to say that over the last 4, 5 years, several children have been returned, which is absolutely not acceptable. That, a child is adopted and for whatever reasons, the child is unable to fit into a family and has to be returned. And that means such a big trauma, which is like the third or fourth trauma that the child actually faces, and it's very hard to recover from it. So, so I would just say that it's been a fascinating journey with lots of learning over the years, and although I mean, if I were to tell anybody that it's the most amazing journey, I would also say that you need to make an informed choice. You cannot just go into it with stars in your eyes and romanticism and believe that you'll just be a parent. Like for instance, just to give you an example, yesterday I had a call from somebody in Tamil Nadu, who was actually had a problem with the adoption deed, and he said, I just want to get this done, and after that it will be hidden away, and I just don't want to talk about this issue of adoption to my child, and it will be over. Now, that is something which is not a possibility today for several reasons. Because children are coming in older, they're older in age, and I remember those days. There were people who would actually get admitted into a hospital. They would pretend to be pregnant, and a child would be put in their arms, and birth certificate made in their name. But all that has changed when we talk about legal adoption, because now you don't get a child who is newborn. You have to wait till the clearances are done. Like if it's a relinquished child, then 2 months is given to the birth mother to reconsider her decision. If it is an abandoned child, then the police has to do a lot of work to see that the child is not kidnapped or lost or trafficked or any of those things. So rarely does a newborn child come into a family, and therefore you can't hide it from the most important person, and the whole world knows that the child is adopted, but the child. So which is something which is not acceptable, because all relationships are built on trust. And therefore, if today, I mean, I'm really talking about yesterday. I'm not even talking about, a year back. Yesterday, if a parent is still able to say that, look, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to tell the child anything about it. I think we still have a long way to go, because we've still not understood what it means to build a foundation of relationships on lies. You can't do it. So it's quite amazing, and there are many things I would like to talk about. But Blessy, I think you have some questions. We'll take
Yes.
them.
All right. Ma'am, you mentioned that you adopted 35 years ago, and since that was before CARA was formed, and you were one of the founding members of CARA, could you talk about what were the factors that led to a decision to form a central body like CARA, and what are the benefits of streamlining the whole process?
Yeah, so like I mentioned in fleeting, that there were a lot of questions raised about the issue of inter-country adoption. There were a lot of questions raised about the issue of trafficking in children. Children were sent unregulated. Children, we didn't know what happened to those children when they went to those countries. And all this led to what we call the Hague Convention. The Hague Convention was a convention or a treaty which countries signed, and so they were receiving countries and they were sending countries. And therefore, all these countries who became members of the Hague and signed an agreement on that uh, pledge to the fact that we will regulate, we will see that it is done in a fashion that it limits at least the chances of trafficking. So it was thought that this process would actually lead to children being legally free for adoption. That means no child was kidnapped or taken away or coerced into or sold. So therefore, when CARA was set up, the primary purpose of CARA was to see that it was done in a fashion which was as laid down in the Hague Convention. If anybody is interested, it's available to read, and you can look at the Hague Convention on Inter-Country Adoption. And therefore, CARA was set up to be an independent body. Unfortunately, CARA over the years has ceased to be that independent body, like many other bodies, and it has kind of come directly under the government, and the funds come from the government. So earlier, the chairperson of CARA and various other members were not all actually employees of the government. There could be now that that is not true, and there are many changes or modifications that have happened over time. So that is the primary purpose. And so it was to regulate intercountry adoption. But intercountry adoption cannot be regulated till we look at some of the things that are believed to be right for a child. For instance, the belief that all children have a right to their own biological family first. That
Okay.
means if a child is in need of care and protection. The parents are too poor, the parents, one parent has deserted, or there is a single mother, or various other conditions like the mother is in jail or a mental asylum. These are children who are called children in need of care and protection. So
Right.
the state comes into being to take care of these children who are in need of care and protection. So there are orphans, there are children who are surrendered, there are abandoned children, so they're called OAS children. That means orphan, abandoned, and surrendered children. Or there are children who are just there for other reasons, reasons of poverty, reasons of
Right.
other factors which make them, being placed in institutional care and to be looked after by the state. Unfortunately, and that is my plea, and I feel really, really saddened because my primary work is related to children's rights and development. And I feel no child should remain in institutional care because
Right.
the legacy of institutional care leaves a child deprived of many, many rights, right to love, right to nurturance, which then impacts the child in terms of physical development, emotional development, intellectual development, and so many other areas. Therefore, even if the child remains, it's kind of calculated, I don't know how exactly, but for every month that a child remains in institutional care, there is a delay of 3 months in all
Yes.
the areas of development. So you can understand what happens when children remain for years and years
Right.
and then they are released. And very often I've found people being very insensitive because they'll
Right.
say, oh, well, anyway, these children come from homes of poverty and all that. So, anyway, they're getting better care, they're getting more nutrition, etc., etc., which is absolutely fraught with a lot of problems. Because when a child is in an institution, there is no primary caregiver. There are attachment issues because there are changing caregivers. There is no eye contact, sometimes no holding. There are so many things which make it difficult for the child to even adjust into a family after several years. And that
Right.
is something that very few in governments understand, very few people in general understand that what are the problems that a child can actually carry for the longest time. And that is why I was telling you that, it's not the same. When you get
Right.
a child you birth a child, you know the history, you know all of that. But when this child comes to you through months of various fractured
Yeah.
journeys, then you don't know what he's come to you with. So I
True.
think that is what is my deep concern, and I really, really wish to work in that area so that we can sensitize governments, we sensitize people to the importance of early placement in a home. Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much for sharing that. And I think I agree with you. There are a lot of studies that prove why every child needs a supportive and loving environment to thrive. And, if I go by several reports that state that there are close to 30 million children that are either orphaned or abandoned or surrendered or are not living in supportive environments. And why do you think there is such a big gap in the number of children that need families and the number of children that are eligible for adoption?
Yeah, so this is a very, very, interesting fact that seems to kind of become like there's so many children who are available for adoption because there may be so many children in institutional care, but
Right.
all of them, number one, are not legally relinquished by their parents. They
Right.
are there in homes because maybe the parent is unfit, Maybe the parent is sick, maybe the parent is hospitalized, maybe one parent is has deserted and the other is unable to care for the child. In our country, poverty is a very big reason to, have child found on the road or somewhere and uncared for, and so this child comes into the care of the state. So one large section of children are children who are not legally available because their parents have not given up their rights. Now you can question that why? Why can't the rights be taken away by the state? Like many Scandinavian countries, if a parent is found to be unfit, like Norway, they just remove the child from the family. Now we can really kind of discuss that. Is that right? Is that all right? Is that and as of now, this state has given the biological parent the first right to the child. So we cannot question that. We cannot take away that right till the parent themselves give up that right. So that is one large section. Maybe 50% of the children would be those who are not legally free for adoption. Then we come to the rest of the kids. Now, there's a recent, I think, uh, data that is available from CARA, which says of the children available, suppose we take in the last quarter, some 1,800 children are available. Of those, 70% are disabled. They're children who have special needs.
Yes.
Okay, now tell me how many of our Indian families will take a child with special needs? No,
Right.
not even color, not even a small scar, not even, I mean, maybe an extra finger, or not even something like an umbilical hernia, which is actually very, very small, or a cleft palate, which can be repaired. No. I remember going to Missionaries of Charity, one of those early years when I used to visit for inspection, etc. I saw 5 children, beautiful young children with cleft palate. And they said these children will not go to Indian families. Then not nobody is going to take them. Very recently, again, I had a call from Kolkata where this young woman had been waiting for 3 years for a child. And my heart goes out to young people who are like cannot have a child and they're so desperate for a child. They want this perfect child to fill up the gap in their lives. And she said, ma'am, after 3 years I've been referred this child, and the child has a scar on the forehead. And it's a girl child. I I feel really bad and I won't be able to deal with it. I said, look, you've got a child after 3 years. Suppose it was a child born to you. What would you do? You would probably, maybe cut a fringe or maybe do some plastic surgery later, or just it's okay to have a scar. It doesn't really matter. But she wasn't convinced. So I can also, I mean, I'm not being judgmental. I don't want to be judgmental because it's very painful when you've been, waiting and suddenly you are shown a child with a disability or a health condition or just a very dark color or tribal features or whatever. So I think that's a reality we have to contend with, and that is the reason why one of the reasons why so many parents continue to wait, whereas there are children in institutional care. There can be
Right.
siblings. There are sibling groups, 3 children together. They cannot be separated, so they have to go together. There can be twins. So these categories of children find homes with great difficulty in the country. And I must say, I mean, over the years, for many years, I've been on the NOC committee. That is
Right.
that committee which clears children for inter-country adoption. And I, I, I just kind of cannot understand that they are willing to take so many children with so many difficulties. Maybe the state supports, and I kind of believe that there must be state support. The other difference is that for us, we don't get let go of the child at 18. We kind
Yeah.
of care. My mother-in-law will still care for me at 65, even though she's 90. Oh, you haven't eaten, you haven't done this, why are you late today? Oh, did college go off fine? You're not looking well today. Whereas many of those children who go abroad, uh, by 18 they are on their own. There is very little responsibility of the parents towards the child. And so there are several such factors that make it possible for some of these children who are unacceptable here to be adopted outside the country.
All right. I'll come back to those concerns you mentioned about disabled children and others who are not being adopted that often. But before that, I've spoken to a lot of adoptive parents and prospective adoptive parents. And while so many of them are happy about this whole streamlining of the process with CARA, one concern that they have is the extremely long waiting period. And many have also mentioned the lack of transparency. That is, they would like why why they are having to wait so long, or what is the status of adoption, because also for them it creates a lot of mental stress. So what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is very, very important for CARA to be open and transparent. I think to some extent they have put in some of that data. If you open the various agencies, you will see how many children are available, how many categories are there. But if you position yourself as a person who is waiting for that child,
Yeah.
and you see the numbers, it's just I mean, you cannot do anything. I mean, it just will be so slow because the numbers are so few that is legal, those who are legally free. But that is not to say that there is no apathy. There is, I mean, it's very slow. People don't think it's important to rush up things. If the child comes into a CWC, there has to be an investigation which is done. There has to be some speed and urgency. That
Yeah.
is something which is, or for instance, if a child is, uh, the mother is, say, in a mental asylum, and
Yeah.
obviously this woman cannot legally, cannot free the child because, so then you have to get a set of experts who look at the prognosis of this mother. Is she ever going to be okay to be able to take care of the child? Now, these are very tricky things, very, very tricky things. Even when there is abuse of a child in a family, PwC is so cautious to take away the rights of that child from the family. So this cautiousness and this, the larger belief that the child is the, you know, I can't say property or the basically to be with biological parents is something which is the larger framework within which the government or the country operates. And that we can question that. You can say, okay, can we take off the rights? Can we remove the rights of the parent of these categories? We can discuss it. But as of now, no. There are a lot of children whose parents are there, but the rights cannot be removed from them. And also, let me also come back to it. There is a very, very interesting series that was done on one child who went to a particular country and was came back looking for the roots and found that one important document, which was the document which had to be signed by the father to relinquish the child, was not there. She
Okay.
was so angry because I think there is also this that is brewing in other countries that we cannot just be exported out. So there are
Right.
these very large political groups of adoptees. There was a site which I had seen earlier, which was called Bastard Nations, where South Korean adoptees were in arms. More recently, I've seen some studies where they want to reclaim their name. So there was a whole study on reclamation of their name. So if they were Joseph or something else, named by their adoptive parents, they wanted to go back and add that Lee or that Wong or whatever other name to their name, and they felt that that was a loss of their identity. So
Right.
it's very complex. We can't address, bless you, all of these issues, but
Of course.
there are
Yes.
multiple issues that are there.
Right. Okay. Since you mentioned inter-country adoptions, I was just reminded of this couple from Canada. They had other adopted children, and they wanted to adopt a child from India, and that was not through CARA. There was the birth mother herself approached this couple, and so they had to go through this really tedious legal battle to get custody of the child, and that's guardianship, right? Not
No,
adoption.
no. Actually, now if they go through CARA through proper process, then the Juvenile Justice Act operates for all you know people who adopt. So it is not only earlier it was that if a
Okay.
child went abroad and was not of you know Indian origin, then the child went under guardianship. But today the
Okay.
child goes under the full and complete adoption under the JJ Act. But yes, if
Right.
somebody does all this kind of hanky panky and takes the child out through other means, then you do have a problem. Then you will have a lot of difficulty, because then why will Kara, if it's
Yeah.
not, first the child has to be declared in need of care and protection.
Right.
So you have to declare the child in need of care and protection, and then only work further.
Right, right. Okay, but I was also trying to get at our private adoptions. I don't mean illegal adoptions, but a lot of adoption agencies or childcare centers are not linked with government agencies, and so probably there are children whose names are not even listed in the government
You're
list. So what?
100% right. So our country is amazing at doing all kinds of jugaad. So we are there are adoptions happening quietly at a level of okay, we'll give you this much money, and you a birth certificate is made in the mother's name, because you can go to the MCD office, pay 1,000 rupees and say this child was born at home and birthed by my mother-in-law, by my mother, please make the birth certificate. But all these things have become very, very uh, tough for the child. Now, I know one or several cases actually, where specifically this one case which was harrowing, because this child, the mother and father, uh, had taken this child like that, through some gadbad way. I mean, not through Kara or not through any legal manner, and then they died in a car accident. Now there was some family member or whoever who knew that this was an adopted child, and through DNA testing said this is not their child. This is some maid child they're looking after, and so if this child was put in a home again, she was 8 9 years old. She was removed from there, because today DNA testing is there. So you
Right.
can you can't lie. And if there's anybody, when the child grows older and the parents are not there, people can challenge it. And sometimes they hide the whole fact from the child. So when others know and the child doesn't know that he or she is adopted, it comes as such a huge, rude shock
Yeah.
that, I was adopted and now I have nothing. All that I thought was mine actually doesn't belong to me, and somebody else takes it. So it's very risky. I always tell parents, don't do that. Complete the legal part of it, because in earlier times, you were talking about 50 years ago, all that, this DNA testing and all wasn't there. So, chal raha tha. But what you're saying, the other part of it, we still have the HAMA.
Right.
Under HAMA, that is the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act, if there is a Hindu couple, so a giver, and another Hindu couple who's the taker, through
Yeah.
a religious ceremony or what is called the Datak ceremony, the giving and taking of the child can happen under
Okay.
HAMA. So that
Okay.
is also something that operates in our country at another level. So lots of things are happening. It's so what our CARA figures are not really all the figures. We don't even know these other figures. But of course, all adoptions have to be registered. Whether it is
Yes.
through HAMA or JJ Act, they should be registered like marriage. You have marriages that take place under the various traditions, but today you need to register them. So you need
Right.
to have a registered marriage under whichever law. It can be under the Special Marriage Act, it can be under the Hindu law, under the Muslim law, whatever. So that registration has to happen. So that is there 100% Blessy. There are many, many layers that exist.
Right. Okay. All right. So, coming back to the perspective of parents, prospective adoptive parents and adoptive parents, again, I've heard a lot of instances where these PAPs are discouraged from adopting simply because of the lack of sensitivity from authorities, adoption authorities. Like I've heard of instances where they've been asked about health issues and their status of being single, and uh, you know, um, and a lot of them feel discouraged by these questions,
So it's
and
not questions, it's actually laid down now. They're not just questions. So you have to give all these various documents. You have to give
right,
your medical certificate. You have to give your income certificate. You have to give your marriage certificate. If you're single, if you're divorced, you have to give your divorce papers. So all those things are listed there as an attempt to safeguard the interest of the child. Because,
right,
see, there was a time when even, 50, 60 year olds were adopting infants. So now they've said that, well, if they are older parents, then we don't have takers for older children. So let's work on a kind of rule that says, okay, if you're an older parent, why don't you take an older child? Which has no logic. It actually has no logic. The only logic is all children need to be placed. So let's place the older children with the older parents and younger children with younger parents. No logic. No logic. Except that this exists and therefore we are working on this
all right,
criteria. So
yeah,
it's not that this is like they are asking insensitive questions. No, it's part of the guidelines. It's laid
okay.
down as very clearly as documents that have to be submitted.
Right. Okay. But there were also instances where they were asked about issues such as like weight, and
Oh,
other
that
very
is that is
non-harmful. Yeah.
that see is not by CARA. The social worker from a particular agency may have a
Yes.
mindset that says, oh, ये लोग तो बेकार होते हैं, इनको ऐसे नहीं ऐसे ही करना चाहिए ये वो. So those exist, as we know. Even when adopted children go to school, there are so many teachers who are so
Yeah.
insensitive.
Right.
know, they say all kinds of things about these children. So the world is full of these people, and I don't know. One should try and sensitize them. And over
Yes.
the last 2 3 years, we did a whole lot of training
Okay.
programs for social workers across the country, trying to sensitize them. But it's, they're changing. They keep changing. You do one set because it's such a poorly paid job. I mean, if you look at the social workers across the country, some were getting even lesser than 4,000 rupees a month. Can you imagine a trained social worker? I mean, the training can be also questionable, but a social worker just getting 4,000 rupees. And therefore, the kind of attitudes, those things, they just move. They move from one to another. And therefore, all the time you have to have sensitization, workshops, attitudes, the language that is used. I mean, so many times I've had educated people ask me, do you like your real child more than your,
Yes. Yes.
I mean, is there a real child?
Yeah.
So both are as real, or do you like your own child? So and this is has nothing to do with education, but the whole insensitivity to the area. And therefore, this session like this is so important. Although I know there are very few people on the session, and I hope it is there on YouTube and other places to see. But I do think that lack of awareness about terminology, what we use, what we say, how do we construct this whole thing of adoption is a very, very critical thing.
Right. All right. That brings me to another important question. Like you mentioned in your introduction, the discourse doesn't end with just adoption. You don't just bring a child home and it doesn't end there. What happens after you bring a child home? Do parents understand how to talk about adoption with their child? And a lot of these children, like you mentioned, have faced severe trauma, and are parents equipped to handle all that? And do you think there needs to be training on how to be more sensitive to their needs?
Yeah, so Blessy, this is my current agenda, that with more and more children who are coming into the adoption uh, net, as it were, being older. They are, most of them are not below 2 years, some of them are over 2 years, sometimes they're 5 and 6 years. It means that they come with a certain baggage. So there are children who carry their trauma with them. There are parents who carry their trauma with them because they've been through cycles of IVF, they may have gone through surrogacy, they may have gone through a lot of pain being infertile couple, people saying nasty things, not being included in various events, etc., etc. So both carry this pain, and I think it's very important to acknowledge that this pain exists. Because if we
Right.
don't acknowledge it, then when it comes up, it can be very, very difficult to handle. Just to give you an example, some examples, like for instance, we've had instances where the child has seen, say, the mother being burnt, or the violence in the family or whatever. So when the child comes in and the parents are very happy, we're going to celebrate the first birthday and we're going to do this, we're going to do cake cutting. The moment they get a cake, they put a candle and they light the candle, and the child just goes crazy because the child may have seen fire, the child may have seen trauma related to fire, and the parents don't understand. They don't know the background of the child, they don't know the history of the child many times. And if they're not prepared for that, this is going to be a big event, which means, oh, this child is mad, we can't handle this child, this child has mental issues or whatever, whatever. So this is just one small example. But suppose we also take a child who came in, say, like my daughter, at a very young age she came into my family. But even at that young age, I think many families, because I've covered now, I have so many people who are part of my family in terms of adoption network. So many families or parents will tell you that when the child comes in, the child is so quiet. The child is so, will not cry, will not whimper. Even if the child pees or poos, will be very quiet, will not actually express their emotions. And why is that? Because obviously, in the institution, if the child cries, or when the child was left in the forest or wherever, the child was not picked up or was not responded to, and which meant that the child understood that nobody will understand me. Nobody will, if I keep crying, also nothing will happen. But within a very short while, I remember just thinking that, okay, we should make a diaper alarm and maybe it should go off when the child wets themselves. But we didn't really need to do that, because within a very short time, the child knew that here responsiveness is taking place.
Right.
So right from there, then then by the time the child becomes 3 and 4, there are lots of questions, and you are nervous because you're waiting for that question, because the child may look different, the child may, others around may have this thing. So the child asks, okay, did I come up, which hospital did I come from? Or where did I come from? Did I come from your tummy? And then that's the time parents are like, now what do we say? Should we just push it under the carpet by saying, you came from that hospital, you came from that place? So you don't address it. So you give these half truths, or you say, you came from my heart. Now, very soon the child goes to a nursery school and tells others that, no, I didn't come from my mama's stomach, I came from her heart. Now that's a joke, because all children will laugh and say, well, nobody comes from the heart, because children don't understand metaphors. They don't understand this till much later. So you can't do these half truths. You have to be confident. It is painful. It's not that I'm going to say that it does not cause, it does cause pain. But you tell the child little by little, okay, you didn't
Right.
come from my stomach, But there was somebody else, and she couldn't keep her child, and I loved you, you smiled at me, you did whatever, as close to the real thing as possible, and just as much. But the child, very soon at 7, when they move from the pre-operational stage to the concrete operational stage, they'll start asking, well, you chose me, but then somebody must have given me up. Somebody must have left me. Why did they leave me? Why did they do that? Was I terrible? Was I horrible? Was she a bad woman or was she? Then, as they become 14, they'll start watching Hindi movies, which are absolutely wonderful in getting children all knocked around. So they'll say, oh, was my mother an unwed mother? Was my mother a prostitute? What happened? Why this? Why that? So these questions will build up and we will have to answer them. Together with this will also be other issues. You're disciplining the child. So the child will say, you're not my mother. I'm not going to listen to you. Who are you to tell me to do this? Or if the child is not good in studies and the parents are doctors or engineers or whatever, then I don't belong. I'm not like you. I'm terrible. I should have just been left. I should have been born a dog. These are all real comments by children. So there is a whole range of things that will come up.
Yes, or with siblings who are not adopted.
Or if you come to the fact that by the time they are adults, okay, should I tell my boyfriend? Should I not tell him? Somebody will say, oh, well, you didn't tell me you're adopted. You're not good enough. Look, you get such bad grades. You must have come from a really bad background. God knows whose child you are. So they're very, very painful things children will say to each other. And yet we can't fight the world. So we have to strengthen our kids. We have to tell them that, well, this is your reality. But somebody else's reality also you make fun of. Somebody is fat, you say, oh, kitna mota hai. Somebody is bald, you say, oh, uske baal nahi hai. You make fun of all these people. So this is your reality and somebody will find that time to make fun of you. It's not right. It's not all right. But you'll have to fight this. That is your life. And if somebody rejects you on the basis of this, that person is not good enough. You don't have to please that person. So that strength has to come. And then in adulthood, then when the first child is born, it's like, oh my God, this is the first person who is related to me by blood. So it's a different kind of thing that comes in. So, Leslie, it's a journey. It's not a one-time thing. It will be that hand-holding that is required, and parents will need that because they're stumped by some of these questions. They don't know what to say. And when they don't know what to say, sometimes they lie. And when they lie, then there has to be a going back at some further time. So we cannot, we wish not to build any relationship on distrust. It has to be a trusting relationship. And we know that. I mean, all of us know that we've had friends where we lied once and they will not believe you for life. They will say, no, you're a liar. I don't trust you. And children have told their parents that. They have said, look, you've lied to us. I'm not going to believe you ever now. I'm not going to trust you ever. It's very painful. So we don't want that to happen to any parent or child. And therefore, this hand-holding is a very important thing. And therefore, this counseling, which is a pre-adoptive counseling, must be there. All parents must go through that so that they make an informed choice. And they know that there is somebody who would help us go through this process. So a lot of us are working towards that. There are organizations in Bangalore, in Pune, in Tamil Nadu, but many places have nothing. Many places have no support groups, nobody who's come out to say we're going to help. So today we think that the digital media is a fantastic space. So if we're able to spread our word and say we are there for you, just connect with us, we will help you through this. Fantastic. That's why I never refuse anybody who says, talk about adoption. I just think even if I can reach out to one person, I think it's important.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing and highlighting the need for this discourse. To conclude with, can you mention or can you just sum up the most immediate steps we need to take that to ensure that more children can be adopted?
Yeah, so I think we need to have a multi-pronged approach. We need to start with, of course, transparency, that this is what exists. Parents should know that these are the category of children that are available. They shouldn't feel that CARA is doing some hanky-panky business and not giving us children, and they're trying to kind of, you know, just delaying it for no reason. I think the data should be out there. That these are the numbers, these are the kind of children available, not available, whatever, so that parents can actually see that this is
Right.
what it is. I mean, you don't have to name the children, you don't have to do any of that, but you can list, you can put down A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. The
Yeah.
second thing is that knowing that a majority of children are special needs children, even those who we deem as typical are not. So many carry mental health challenges. I know there is so much anger. Most of the children I'm dealing with now are in the age group 9 to 15. They were adopted as normal, typical children. But the pain of rejection by a biological mother, the pain of multiple caregivers, the pain of believing that you were left or given up, the anger towards the adoptive parents that maybe you bought me, maybe you just took me away from my birth parents, maybe they would have been kinder to me and not you. So there are so many things these kids are carrying,
Yeah.
and they don't have answers for it. So I think it's very important that parents also need preparation. They need to
Right.
understand that can we deal with this? Are we capable of dealing with these issues even if the child is, doesn't have a health problem? I mean, a key like special needs child or something like that. No. All children, they call it the primal wound when a child is actually left or rejected by the birth mother, because it's a wound that is so deep that very often children are not able to come to terms with that. Having said that, children are very resilient. This will be a stage they will go through anger and this and that. And I can tell you that all of us who were those older parents at that time, 30 years ago, today will tell all younger parents, this too shall pass. This too will change. So just hang in there. Just be there for the child. Don't start feeling, oh, am I a bad parent, or the child is bad, or the child is doing this or that. This is just a stage of coming to terms with that. Once they reach a space where they have more identities than just one of an adopted child. Like, for instance, my daughter is a dancer today, and she really values that identity. She's married, she has four uh, children, four puppies that are her children. And so those identities are what make her. So adoption becomes one of those identities. I don't think that it ever goes away, but
Right.
it is kind of, petered down, as it were. So I do think that that is another reason where area where we need to work. And the third and the most important area is that when children are in institutional care, we need to have a system of volunteerism where people can go and play with children, they can do activities with children, they can, they need not just lie in an atmosphere where there are bare walls, there's nobody talking to them, there's nobody playing with them, there's nothing happening. I think that is something I tried to develop it with my students and the state government, saying that open up to these young students, let them come and play, let them engage with these children so that they are not left, being delayed, being traumatized. So we
Right.
have to deal with the baggage that the children are carrying. We have to deal with the baggage that parents are carrying, and we need to work with the state at every level. At the level of the agencies, at the level of CWCs, at the level of the police, and at every level we have to create an urgency.
Yeah.
There is that lovely poem which is there, na? The child's name is today. It's that Gabriella, I think. It's a beautiful poem. I don't know whether you've read it, but it's a wonderful poem.
Okay.
And it's just, do you want me to read it? It's a very small poem. I don't know where it is. I won't be able to find it, but doesn't matter. It's a brilliant poem which says children can't wait. You cannot
Yes.
say tomorrow we will do it. No, we
Yes.
have to do it today. If the child comes in, even in disability, we are saying early intervention. You have to intervene immediately. You can't say, oh, bada ho jayega, it will become okay, the child will be fine. No, we'll do it later. No. The day the child comes, we find out what are the challenges, what are the issues, start working with the child through play, through activities of building trust. Many of these children are so traumatized. They've been left in the jungle. Sometimes I've seen their mouth being eaten by the dog, or their leg is eaten by all kinds of insects. I mean, they come in states which are unimaginable. You can cry. You can actually cry in pain when you see these kids. So we need to address them immediately. We need to address, of course, we address the medical. I'm not saying medical is not addressed. It's addressed, food is addressed, clothing is addressed, but emotional needs are not addressed. And that is where we need a whole host of people who come in and say, foster care. Play and actually, foster care is something which we really need to develop so that children can come. They don't need to be in institutional care. They need to be with families. Families also don't want to take foster children because they think, अरे फिर वो ले लेंगे, वो adoption के लिए कोई ले लेगा. So it's a mindset that we're
Right.
not ready for right now. And I think there are many, many levels that we need to work on if we want the adoption program to benefit children and families. Yeah.
All right. That's a really nice way to sum it up. And like you said, children can't wait and childhood can't wait. And there is a need for urgency. Thank you very much, ma'am, for sharing your thoughts with us and your experiences. That was really, really informative. And thank you very much, audience, for joining us today. I truly hope that we will have more discourse around adoption and the need for it in our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you, for patiently listening. And thank you, Blessy, for this opportunity
If
of being
anyone
able to talk to so many people. And I hope they carry this message further. I know it's not enough, there are very few people, but nonetheless, I think everybody counts. So thank you
if
so much,
anyone has
all of
any
you, for
questions,
being here and listening patiently. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.